welcome to the second of our group discussions that we're having. And the topic for this afternoon is the Bhagavad Gita, which is a very broad topic by choice. Okay, I'll start off straight away. What I want to do is I'll make a brief presentation, relatively brief as one could be when the topic is as wide-ranging as that. And then if you've got any questions, please put them up on the chat. And at certain points, I will pause the discussion, pause what I'm saying, and go and have a look at the questions. So if you have any questions at all about the Gita or even wider subjects, please do go ahead and type them there, and I will answer them if I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I will ignore the question, obviously. I don't want to be caught out like that. Okay, the Bhagavad Gita. As I say, it's an enormous subject, and I'm going to inevitably have to focus on particular lines of discussion. I was reading 2 or 3 weeks ago Robert Zainer's book called Concordant Discord. It's quite an old book. He was the Spalding Professor of Religions at Oxford in the late 60s and 70s. But one thing that I picked up on that, I didn't particularly like the book, actually. It seemed to be showing how all religions are aligned with Roman Catholicism, which didn't quite ring true. But nonetheless, an interesting comment that he makes when discussing the Bhagavad Gita. He says, "To my mind, it ranks as the most significant sacred text in the whole history of religion." Now, that might be regarded as something of an overstatement, I think, but and I wouldn't like to draw comparisons with Western religions, and I'm sure Muslims and Christians might disagree with that, but certainly I think in the context of Indian religion, the significance of the Bhagavad Gita cannot be underestimated. And the reason I say that is that it stands at a crucial juncture in the development of Indian religion, and it draws together diverse strands and unites them in a common single exposition. Now, what I mean by that is, first of all, the Bhagavad Gita clearly looks back to the Vedic revelation, and particularly the teachings of the Upanishads. It seeks to establish the existence of a spiritual entity at the very core of our being, called the Atman, the embodied being, the spiritual entity that survives the death of the body. And in order to make that point, it directly refers to the teachings of the Upanishads, and on occasion it directly quotes from the Upanishads. Interesting. Chapter 2, verse 19 of the Gita is an exact quotation of chapter 2, verse 19 of the Katha Upanishad. Now, you might think, well, that's a strange coincidence, or you might think it's deliberate. Krishna's doing that. He's giving a kind of sneaky reference to his source there. I think another point I would make is about the Gita. When Krishna starts to speak, it does say in verse 10 of chapter 2, prahasan eva. As he's speaking, he appears to be smiling. So Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, another, I suppose, feature of the text is the wonderful poetic manner in which it makes its points. And Krishna in particular likes to play with language. He uses Sanskrit words, the same word often, with different meanings in close conjunction with another. And you can imagine as he's doing this, because it's a little bit confusing. Here he's using the word sattva to mean this, there he's using the word sattva to mean that, and they're both in the same verse. And then you cast your mind back, prahasaniva, and he's looking at our confusion and our trying to make sense of what he means, prahasaniva, as if smiling at us. Yeah, but definitely embodying the revealed wisdom of the Upanishads, drawing on it, using it to make his points to Arjuna about the fact that the death of the body doesn't mean the death of the living entity, because the living entity survives the death of the body. But more importantly, perhaps, the Gita, as well as looking back to the Vedic revelation in the form of the Upanishads, it also looks forward to the future development of Indian religion, and in particular, the devotional forms of Indian religion, which become to predominate Indian religion over the following 2 millennium, for the last 2,000 years. Progressively, it's devotional religion. And perhaps to the Western mind, schooled in the academic study of religion, a little confusingly. I remember well when I first went to India many years ago in the early 70s as a young fella. I'd read the Upanishads, and naively I expected when I got to India I would find, I don't know what I expected to find, but sages discussing all the Upanishads and things like that. And what I got was a bewildering array of forms of devotional religion, which I couldn't align with the Upanishads. But it's these devotional forms of religion that have come to play such a prominent role in India over the last 2 millennia, really. And it's the seeds of that devotional religion are quite clearly located in the Bhagavad Gita in forms that we simply do not find in the Upanishads. The idea of bhakti, devotion, the idea that the supreme reality is not just a somewhat impersonal Brahman, but is in fact a personal deity. And moreover, that deity urges us to develop a relationship of devotion and even of love with him. So Krishna makes a remarkable statement in chapter 12, Yomad Bhaktaha Same Priyaha. One who devotes himself to me is beloved of me. There is a relationship of love established and set forth in the Gita that we will never find within any of the Upanishads, not even really hinted at, perhaps Shvetashvatara, but nothing on that scale. Priyaha, it's still a very familiar word amongst Indian people. Many daughters are named Priya, means the one that is beloved, and Krishna uses exactly that word 5 times, I think, in chapter 12, Yomad Bhaktaha Same Priyaha. And alongside that, there is a doctrine of liberation, not through yoga, not through higher knowledge as the Upanishads teach, but through grace and love, that Krishna will deliver the devoted person. He doesn't have to conquer over the problems of life by himself. Krishna will do it for him. He makes that point, and he says the reason why he does it, Tesham evanu kampartam aham agyanajam tamaha nashayami. I destroy the darkness of ignorance. Why? Why would he do that? Why would he intervene in someone's spiritual existence? Anukampa artam. Anukampa, for the reason of anukampa, and anukampa means compassion, because he feels love, compassion. Therefore, he delivers the living being from the trials and tribulations of rebirth. So for that reason, again, it's such a significant text. It establishes the fundamental foundation of Indian devotionalism, Vaishnav and Shaivite in many ways, although Shaivism goes off in a direction of its own, but very similar ideas to that. Right at the end, Krishna says to Arjuna, don't worry about anything. Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishami. I will deliver you from all the problems of life. I'll do it for you. I'll take up the burden that you are carrying at the moment. Such a significant development in Indian religion, and such a significant movement away from the more austere spirituality of the Upanishads. Okay. Okay. There's a question, a very specific question there. I want to also make a point about the other point that perhaps that we should make. Sorry, I'm just checking to see if I can make the. Okay, there's a question. Could you please elaborate on action in inaction? I will do. Please wait a little, and I'm going to build up that point. The other point I'd say about the Bhagavad Gita is it has been commented upon innumerable times, and translations of it abound. There are numerous English translations, but going right back thousands of years, we have the great acharyas of India, the great teachers of religion, have all presented us with commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita, in which they explain from their own perspective the meaning. And what's remarkable is, I've got a few of them. I've got quite a few of them here. I've got Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya, Mahatma Gandhi. I've got as well Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who founded Transcendental Meditation. Here's Gandhi's version of it. Madhusudan Saraswati's I've got as well. I've even got one of my own there, last and probably least. But so it's clearly a text which has been of great significance. I think what's remarkable about the commentarial tradition is that people, or acharyas, teachers, understand the Gita from such radically different perspectives. They hold absolutely antithetical understandings of the Gita, and yet they're all claiming that this is what the Gita is said. And the obvious examples here are Shankaracharya, who is claiming that the Gita proclaims Advaita, oneness of the supreme with the individual, Atman and Brahman. And then you've got Madhvacharya, who say, no, the Gita doesn't say that. The Gita says absolute difference of the individual and Brahman. And yet they're both taking the same Sanskrit verses and finding completely the opposite meanings within them. And I think there's always a danger that when we come to the Gita, we don't necessarily look to see what the Gita itself is saying. We look to see how far does it confirm my own views and even prejudices. Okay, moving on, as we must do quite briefly, quite quickly. The Bhagavad Gita is a text which forms a part of the Mahabharata, the much larger work of the Mahabharata. And I think when I come back in 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be talking particularly about the Mahabharata. But I think it's essential in understanding the Mahabharata to be aware, to understand the Bhagavad Gita, to be aware of that context, the context within the Mahabharata. Now, I know there are some academic writers who wish to separate the Bhagavad Gita out from the Mahabharata, perhaps because it takes a long time to read the Mahabharata, and that would double, triple, or quadruple the amount of work that they have to do to understand it. I mean, Mahabharata is huge. Bhagavad Gita's got 700 verses. Mahabharata has about 75,000 verses. So to go through would be, as I know myself, an extremely lengthy task. I was very lucky. I had a grant from the British Academy years ago, and there were such things to go through the Mahabharata and look at that. But the conclusion of going through the Mahabharata, inevitable conclusion, is that the Bhagavad Gita is an integral part of the Mahabharata. And the reason I say that is that the Mahabharata throws up a number of different questions, different issues it reflects on, one of which is the position of Krishna himself. Who is Krishna? Mahabharata declares Krishna, the speaker of the Gita, is a form, a manifestation. Using later language, we might say an avatar of Vishnu, who has descended to this world in order to rectify problems, particularly in the realm of Dharma. The Bhagavad Gita directly addresses that point as well. The doctrine of avatar is expounded clearly and succinctly at the start of chapter 4. Secondly, I suppose you would say, the question of liberation. How does one gain liberation from rebirth? And the Mahabharata includes huge passages of spiritual teaching, mainly related to Sankhya and yoga, which offer the aspirant a path to liberation from rebirth. The Bhagavad Gita's teachings on the same subject are very much in line with those found in the Mahabharata. But I think most importantly of all, what the Bhagavad Gita does is provide an answer, or provide answers to the key questions raised but not always answered by the Mahabharata. And those key questions relate to Dharma. How do I live my life? What is Dharma? Dharma means proper living, right action. How do I live properly? And specifically, how do I balance my living in this world with the pursuit of otherworldly goals? Does the world matter? Should I just forget about the world and focus on my own spiritual awakening and redemption? And can I just ignore the world? And there's tensions within that. So where the Mahabharata addresses the question of Dharma, it comes up with a number of different understandings of Dharma, which are often at odds with each other. And it's these questions that the Bhagavad Gita is directly addressing. And that's why I say the Mahabharata context is absolutely fundamental to the Bhagavad Gita. And I'll just take a few minutes to explain what I mean by that. Inasmuch as the Mahabharata throws up and offers us a number of different explanations, ideas about what Dharma is. In other words, about how we should live. So it throws up, first of all, the idea of Varna, which means social classes with specific duties. It speaks of a fourfold division of society: Brahmins, who are teachers, priests, guides, have no aspiration for wealth. That's the idea. That's the first. The second Varna is the Kshatriyas, the rulers, the warriors, the administrators, the lawmakers. Third is the Vaishyas, who are business people, agriculturalists. Fourth is the Shudras, who are skilled artisans, craftsmen, people who have specific skills to society. The idea being here that if society is ordered in this very specific manner, where everyone has a clear role in society, then everybody prospers. It's for the mutual benefit of all, because a chaotic society causes problems. An ordered society brings prosperity to all. Therefore, each individual has a social duty, a Varna Dharma. And Arjuna, who is seeking not to fight, he has a duty as a Kshatriya. He has to accept that duty and act against wrongdoers violently if necessary. So there's this Varna Dharma. Set against that then is the Dharma of pure virtue, which is exemplified in the character of Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira, his idea of Dharma is compassion, goodwill, benevolence, charity, helping others, truthfulness, humility. And throughout the Mahabharata, we find Yudhishthira's idea of Dharma coming into conflict with these Kshatriya duties. He's a pacifist warrior, if you like, which is incompatible. He has a duty to protect the citizens, to punish wrongdoers, but he's a man who wants just to express universal love. He's completely forgiving. Many times there are wrongdoers brought before him and he just forgives them with a stern admonition. He has no desire for vengeance. He has great humility. And there's a conflict there, which the Mahabharata explores consistently. Thirdly, in terms of Dharma, there is the Moksha Dharma. There is the pattern of religious, spiritual teachings, mainly based on yoga and Sankhya, which aim at liberation from rebirth for the Atman. And this path of Dharma, this form of Moksha Dharma, is essentially world denying and potentially world indifferent, because basically it's saying that this world is no place for the Atman. It is a lower reality, not unreal, but a lower reality, which you don't seek to transform it, because everything takes place by destiny, but transcend it. Withdraw yourself from the world and focus on your spiritual awakening, enlightenment. Don't concern yourself with the world. There are teachings along those lines, particularly the Sankhya and yoga teachings in the Shanti Paravan, which make that point. Don't involve yourself, engage yourself with the world. Just step back, become a renunciate, world indifferent. You can't change the world. It's just the unfolding of destiny. And then finally, as a little bit of a subpoint, there's also Dharma as ritual. The idea of the Vedic ritual is also regarded as Dharma, of course. And I think you'll find that in every religious tradition, there is some element of ritual life. And the debate there comes at, is ritual enough? Is ritual more important than my attitude of Dharma, my relationship with other beings? Is ritual spiritually enlightening? Does it bring me to a position of spiritual awakening? So you've got, within the Mahabharata, you've got all these different ideas about what Dharma is and what Dharma should be, fermenting and working against each other. And often authoritative voices in the Mahabharata offer contrary conclusions. So the Mahabharata is, in a sense, a conference or a debate with different views on this subject of Dharma being offered throughout. And this is where the Bhagavad Gita comes in, offering clear answers to these questions, not universally accepted answers, but if we look at the Mahabharata, at Bhagavad Gita, what it's doing is it's addressing these questions that are thrown up by the Mahabharata. And how does it do that? Well, and this is Shivendra's question, really. I'm sorry, it's taken me a while to get round to it, but action in inaction, inaction in inaction. What is that? Karmanya karma yahapasyada karmanicha karmaya. One who sees action in inaction and inaction in action. That's chapter 4, verse 16, I think, is being asked about there. Doesn't seem to make much sense at first view. The point that Krishna does here, and this is to solve the dilemma of world indifference and action within the world, because one thing that the Gita will not accept is that the world doesn't matter. Even though it's a moksha shastra, looking to give the path of deliverance from the world, it still will not accept that the world should be a matter of indifference. It does matter. Performing and fulfilling our social responsibilities is important because other people matter. We can't just ignore our family, ignore our community, ignore our society and say, sorry, everybody, I'm off to the forest to elevate myself beyond the world. The Gita won't accept that. And in fact, it's highly critical of that view. The way it gets around that obstacle is that it switches the focus of renunciation away from your physical position and physical action towards your state of consciousness. So what the Gita is saying is perform all of your duties. Krishna, he said in chapter 3, he says, Loka sangrahameva pisam pasyan, thinking always of the well-being of the world, kartam arhasi. The point that he's making is that what keeps you bound to this world, what keeps you involved in the cycle of karma and rebirth is not the actions that you perform, but it's the state of consciousness that motivates the action. So don't change your action, perform your duty, work constantly for the well-being of the world, but do so without any selfish motivation. That's the point. So where that verse says, one who sees action in inaction and inaction in action, what Krishna means is that if you perform an action, but you have no selfish desire, no malice, no hatred, nothing at all you're seeking for yourself, then although it's action, you may be going around like friends, associates, going around feeding people all over the country, all over the world now. They're constantly thinking of ways and schemes and actions to benefit people. That's action, that's inaction in action. It's inaction, it's akarma, because the motivation is selfless, and therefore it doesn't produce any future reaction. And therefore it is a karma yoga. It's karma, yes, it's action, but it's karma yoga. It's a yoga action, which means it is liberating rather than binding. And Krishna gives us in chapter 3, verse 6, he gives us a rather nice example, I always think so, about one who's renounced the world. He's gone and followed the life of a renunciate, a monk or something, no contact with the world at all, left family, community behind, but within his mind, the desires are raging. He's constantly dwelling not on spiritual enlightenment, but on how much he's going to get to eat for breakfast or something like that, or the woman he left behind or something like that, and his longings for the world are still there. And what Krishna says, that is mithyachara, that's mithya. He may appear to be of renouncing the world, but because the mind is still focused on the world, then there's no renunciation. And that is karma in akarma, although he's not doing anything, because his mind is still seething with aspirations, desires, longings, hankerings, and even sometimes dislikes, hatred, malice. This monk has got elevation before me. How come he's got to be a higher state in the monastery than myself? That's not fair. I hate him. That kind of thing's going on. So although there's inaction, there is still action, and that's the point. The action takes place within the mind, and it's the mental consciousness that generates future karma and future rebirth. You can stay in the world, you can lokasangraham sampasyam, think of the well-being of the world, but without any selfish attachment, not wanting anything for yourself. And that is what Krishna does to reconcile the Varna Dharma, which is for the welfare of the world, with the Moksha Dharma. He transforms Varna Dharma into a form of spiritual practice, which promotes spiritual awakening. And the same applies to the idea of ritual. If you look at the Gita's 2nd chapter, verses 42 to 45, Krishna, and those 42, 43, 44, 45, very, very critical of Vedic ritualism. He says you must go beyond that. It's practiced by desirous people, lusty people, people who are dominated by karma, because they're performing that ritual either out of pride or because they want to get some benefit as a result of the ritual. So again, the ritual then is desire-based ritual, and therefore it's not liberating, it's binding. But at the same time, Krishna doesn't go as far as Buddhists and Jainas do by saying just get rid of all this ritualism completely. Krishna says again, in the same way as Varna Dharma, he says Yogya Dharma, the ritual life, do it without any selfish desire. And he makes the point in chapter 3 that the real purpose of the ritual is to promote the fertility of the world and the prosperity of all beings. Therefore, you perform the ritual not wanting to gain anything at all in terms of reputation or results, material results that come from it, but simply for the well-being of the world, because the ritual life makes it causes the rain to fall. Whether or not that is true, who knows? I know years ago, when there was a drought in Britain, 1976, those who are as old as I am will perhaps recall the great drought of 1976, and it was on the television news at the time that the Hindu community of Leicester went into the park in Leicester and performed a yajna to make the rains come, and it was sort of an amusing item on the news of what these people are getting up to solve this terrible problem that the Minister for Drought couldn't solve. And of course, it rained the next day. That's what it actually happened there, whether or not it was a result of the yajna. But that's the point that Krishna makes. When you perform this yajna, do it as karma yoga, do it desirelessly, and then it becomes non-action in the form of action, and restraining oneself from action while desires surge is action in the context of inaction. So Krishna therefore draws together and solves one of the dilemmas of the Mahabharata. I'm going to stop now and see if I can have a look at questions. Aha, okay. Lakshmi, what does nishkama karma really mean? Is it possible for us to will something and not expect the action to bear a fruit at the same time? Well, nishkama karma, and that's K long A M A, like Kama Sutras, which is perhaps most familiar. And whereas karma has the R in it, that means action. Karma means desire. Nishkama means desireless. So nishkam karma means desireless action. It's another way of referring to the karma yoga that I've just been talking about as the resolution that Krishna offers for the dilemma over, should I act in the world for the benefit of the world, or should I just forget about the world and concentrate on my own emancipation? Okay, let's have a look here. In biblical studies, there is a tendency to equate authenticity with a thematic uniformity. That is, a text containing different or competing ideas is readily declared a composite. Yes. Yes, I get the point. And many scholars have done this, and they've done it with the Mahabharata in particular, but with the Bhagavad Gita. The point being is that where there seems to be different ideas and perspectives within a single text, the response often is to say, oh, well, it must have been written by different people at different times. There must have been interpolations added later on, and people make that point about the Bhagavad Gita. They make it particularly about the Bhagavad Gita. My response to that would be, I would go with Brevard Childs if we're talking about biblical studies, and Brevard Childs talks about the canonical, canonical interpretation. In other words, what is the Bhagavad Gita? Is it a series of different layers of material that different scholars will interpret differently, or is it the text that has been revered by a vast spiritual religious community for hundreds, thousands of years? And we know what the Bhagavad Gita is. It doesn't matter what Professor such and such of such university says about his dramatic discovery of layers of material. It is the 700 verses that are revered within the Hindu community, because all such text critical scholarship is absolutely speculative. It's just guesswork. And I would agree with Vishnu Suptankar, the head of the editors of the critical edition of the Mahabharata, when he said, what did he say? All such attempts are useless, as indeed they were always destined to be. What did he say as well? That such attempts at dividing the text up into different chronological strata, simply examples of wasted ingenuity. And I would agree with him that nobody can say, who knows? What I do think is about the Bhagavad Gita, and I think this is perhaps where I would disagree with Robert Zahner's reading of it, is the Bhagavad Gita doesn't aim to be a philosophical work. We have Indian philosophical works like Yoga Sutras, Sankhya Karika, Vedanta Sutras. They are reasoned texts that move smoothly and easily from point to point. You can see the line of rational analysis within it. Bhagavad Gita isn't a work of philosophy like that. It is a work of spiritual, possibly mystical inspiration. The purpose of the Bhagavad Gita is to provide a source of inspiration for anyone who comes to it, looks at its words, its ideas and language, and takes inspiration from them. And different people will take inspiration from different words, different passages in different ways. And I think that's what the Gita aims to be. That's what it is. It's a spiritual, a form of spiritual inspiration that inspires the reader. And I know myself, having lived with the Gita for 50 years nearly now, constantly I come across things that I hadn't thought about before, and read it in different ways, understand it in different ways, and follow different forms of inspiration. And people may say, well, this contradicts that, this contradicts the other. It doesn't actually contradict itself that much if you really explore it, but it's just a series of spiritual ideas that Krishna offers us. What do you think about this, he says to Arjuna, but what do you think about that? What about yoga practice? How do you feel about that? But then what do you think about devotion to God? And yeah, I think one has to take it in that sense. So I'm not really in favor. I would go with Brevad Charles' canonical method. The Gita is the Gita as it is revered. It is the spiritual property of the Hindu community, and it's bad manners for us outsiders to come and start telling them what they should know. Okay. Okay. Dear Professor, thank you for sharing your devoted bhakti, Jan. Okay. Professor, thank you for sharing. Okay. Bhakti as well. Okay, that's not a question. As the knowledge, please, can you comment on the verse? Oh gosh, I'm really struggling with it. Oh gosh. Sorry, I'm sorry, I've lost the line of the questions there. Oh, there's a lot of questions. I think I'll just try and work my way down them as there is. Okay, we've got done the one about biblical scholarship. As knowledge, as the knowledge, please can you comment on verse? Which speaks about some offer to prana and apana, and others offer apana to prana. I wish I could comment in any detail upon that. Obviously, this is where chapter 4, verse 29, I think, of the Gita, where Krishna's talking about many different types of religious practice, different things, and he's really expanding the idea of what the Vedic ritual is to include yogic practices as well. He says these are all different types of yajna, and he speaks metaphorically because the Vedic yajna is about making offerings into the sacred fire. So he metaphorically compares the practice of pranayama to that Vedic yajna, and the offering is the prana breath into the apana, and the apana breath into the prana. The prana, I think, is the inward breath. The apana is the outward breath, is its name. But I don't know if anybody really understands the form of pranayama that Krishna is advocating there. But it seems quite similar to Patanjali's idea on pranayama that he teaches in the Yoga Sutras. But I don't have enough knowledge of pranayama practices to say any more than that. What he means is, I think, well, I'm going to say something, aren't I now? But I think what he's meaning is that you bring the airs into a state of balance through pranayama, that you somehow bring them into a state of balance, offering the prana into the apana, apana into prana, but I don't really feel I can comment too much in detail about that. Okay. For the Mahabharata was written down, it was handed down. It was handed down, that which is remembered. Yeah, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Was it actually composed orally or was it written? Clearly, and I think this applies to the Mahabharata as well as the Bhagavad Gita, there is a clear suggestion that it was composed with the idea of memorization in mind. And the reason I say that is it's not prose. Some of the Mahabharata is in prose, not much, but it's in verse form, primarily shloka form, some using the Trishtubh Vedic meter when Krishna particularly wants to make a point. But the idea is that if it's balanced, where you've got a fixed number of syllables in every line, then it's easier for memorization. However, the Vedas certainly were not written down for centuries after composition. I tend to think that probably the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita began its life as a written text, but I don't think we can be certain on that point. But I suspect it was written. Okay, okay. I'm just going down. I'm having trouble operating this machine. Let's have a look again. Oh gosh. Oh, it stopped working now. Oh, I think I've got to the bottom. That's right. Oh, it's jammed. Okay. So let's try that. Oh no. Oh, there's a question here about there is oh gosh, oh my gosh. I'm back again. Sorry, I just disappeared then. I'm really not very good with this sort of technology. So I'm trying to say something about the Sanskrit word for grace used in the Bhagavad Gita. I had it explained in my MA class here that it didn't really mean grace in the way that we typically think about it in the West, in the Judeo-Christian traditions. He related the concept of prasad, but I wondered if you could elaborate on the meaning of that word. Yeah, prasad means serenity of mind. It's used in the Yoga Sutras with that meaning. But prasad also means grace, mercy that comes down to us. I think the point would be that regardless of the word that is used, it's the fact that in the Gita, Krishna, who has shown himself to be the one supreme deity, he uses the first person singular in the verbs in which he talks about deliverance. And that means, I will deliver you. I mentioned there, Nashayami, I will destroy the darkness born of ignorance. So whether one uses the word prasad or not, the statement is clear. I will do it for you. Similarly, in chapter 12, verse 7, he says, Teshamaham samudharta mrityu samsara sagara. For the persons who worship me, I am the samudhartri. That means the one who lifts them up, samudhartri. Mrityu samsara sagara, from the ocean of death and rebirth. So again, regardless of the way in which Krishna is using prasad, and he does use prasad in the meaning, in the sense of mental serenity, the statements of those verses are quite clear. It says there as well in chapter 18, verse 66, Aham tva sarva papebhyo moksha yishami. Moksha Yishami, the army ending is I will do it. It's the first person singular. I will do it. What will I do? Moksha. I will moksha you. Aham tva sarva papebhyo moksha yishami. From all the papa, all the horrible things of the world, I will deliver you. Aham tva. Interestingly as well, Krishna uses the Vedic form of the word tva rather than the later tvam. And the reason he does that, I'm sure, is because he wants to make it clear that this is a momentous statement with all the authority of the Veda behind it. This is a really strong conclusion. Aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishami. He said, I will save you. Mashuchaha. Don't worry. Don't be upset. Don't have any problems. I'm going to do it all for you. So I think that the evidence is irrefutable, and the commentators later on, apart maybe from even Shankaracharya, all the commentators have accepted that the Gita has a doctrine of grace as well. So I can't see that point myself. It's clearly stated there. Okay, I think I'm going to move on from questions because there is another point that I want to make, and I'm aware that we're getting close to our end time, if you like, not in a kind of eschatological sense, one hopes, but the end of our time for the talk. I've made the point that the Gita, again, relating to Mahabharata, and I've made the point that the Gita reconciles Moksha Dharma with Varna Dharma, the idea by making Varna Dharma into Karma Yoga. And he also reconciles ritual with making it into a form of Karma Yoga. And later on, he develops Karma Yoga and shows that this Karma Yoga is the basis for Gyan and Bhakti. There are two fundamental paths that the Gita offers. One is the way of knowledge, and the other is the way of devotion, and Karma Yoga is the basis for both of these. He says in chapter 4, verse 43, Sarvam karma kilam pata gyani sarat ganes parisamapite, that all the actions of Karma Yoga reach their conclusion in achieving enlightened knowledge. And in chapter 18, verse 47, he says that the Karma Yoga that you execute is a form of worship of the deity. So Karma Yoga feeds into both the way of Gyan, the way of knowledge, and the way of Bhakti. Two paths, really, the Gita is teaching there. That's made clear at a number of points. He's really offering two broad paths, closely related. I wanted to go back, though, to the points I was making about the reconciliation of the forms of Dharma. And what I haven't referred to so far is Yudhishthira's idea of Dharma as pure virtue, the compassion, the kindness, goodwill, benevolence. This is referred to as Sanatana Dharma. Varna Dharma is specific to yourself, as an individual and your place in society. Ritual Dharma is performed on an individual level, but the Sanatana Dharma of compassion, of ahimsa, non-harming, that is universal to all people, all times, all places. It is, in a sense, the fulfillment of our humanity, as exemplified by Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata. So what does Krishna say about that? Now, I have to confess, years ago, over 20 years ago, I wrote this book. It looks like it's 20 years old, doesn't it? Religious Doctrines in the Mahabharata. And I wrote on this topic in the Mahabharata, and I got it wrong, I'm afraid I have to say. I thought at that time that Krishna in the Gita simply dismissed Yudhishthira's idea of pure virtue as a form of emotionalism, as expressed by Arjuna. But now, over the years, again, as I say, thinking about the verses, I see that that's wrong. He doesn't dismiss Yudhishthira's idea of virtue, Dharma as virtue, at all. Just the opposite, in fact. It's completely wrong. Load of rubbish. They're reprinting it this year, actually, with the same error in there. But the point is, what does Krishna do about Yudhishthira's idea of virtue ethics? He integrates it. He shows that it's an integral part of the Moksha Dharma. And this is important, I think, another really important lesson from the Gita for every spiritual aspirant, whatever path they follow, that Yudhishthira's compassion, his kindness, his goodwill, his benevolence, his complete absence of any malice, hatred, or anger is absolutely essential part of it. You can't make any progress without the virtue dharma of Yudhishthira. And I come to recognize that by reading other verses, particularly perhaps chapter 7, verse 28, where Krishna talks of Yesham Tvantagatam Papam Jananam Punya Karmanam. People who are Antagatam Papam, their papa, their wickedness has gone away completely. They are people who are Punya Karmanam. They do activities. The karma is Punya Karma, righteous, virtuous activities. Te dvanva moha nirmukta. They become nirmukta, liberated from the illusion of duality. In other words, they follow then the path of knowledge and they worship me with firm commitment, firm vows. So in other words, the path of knowledge and the path of bhakti, of devotion, are both, or an integral part of them is antagatam papam, no more wicked actions. And that means actions that are harmful, that cause suffering to others. And punya karma as well. These are the positive actions that bring assistance to others in the way that Yudhishthira always sought to do. But even more significant on that point, and I think which really proves the case, I'll read out, if I may, just a few verses from the start of chapter 16 of the Gita. He talks here about the qualities to be cultivated: fearlessness, being pure in heart, remaining resolute in the pursuit of knowledge through yoga practice, charity, self-control, performing rituals, studying the Vedas, austerity, honesty, never harming, ahimsa, truthfulness, avoiding anger, renunciation, tranquility, never maligning others, compassion for other beings, being free of greed, kindness, modesty, never wavering, energy, patience, resolve, purity, the absence of malice and the absence of arrogance. These are what Krishna calls the Daivi Sampad. And then in verse 5, he speaks again of that Daivi Sampad, which is the collection of all those qualities, which are essentially the virtue dharma of Yudhishthira, the Sanatana Dharma. And he says, Daivi Sampad Vimokshaya. This Daivi Sampad, this collection of qualities, leads to Vimoksha, liberation. And thereby he demonstrates that Yudhishthira's virtue, the idea of Dharma, the Sanatana Dharma, enunciated and exemplified by Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, is an essential part of the spiritual path that Krishna is advocating. Now, I think I saw a question, and which I'll answer. I'm aware that we're nearly out of time, so okay. Okay, would it be correct statement to say that, I'll answer that. Let me finish that point on ahimsa, because it's something when I've given talks before on the Bhagavad Gita in mixed communities, Hindu and non-Hindu, often from those who are non-Hindu, the question arises, how is it that Krishna says, Tasma Jujashva Bharata, therefore fight, Arjun? That's his initial starting point. He wants Arjun to fight, to wage war on the iniquitous enemies. He says that at least 2 times, but also on 3 occasions we can clearly make, he eulogizes the quality of ahimsa, which of course is the very essence of Gandhi's ideology of absolute non-violence, non-harming. And I think to address that point, it's not a contradiction, as some may feel, because what Krishna also says is that any action that you undertake should be done devoid of any selfish aspiration, devoid of any sense of malice, anger, hatred, contempt for others. If we look at the world around us and we see the violence that's taking place, almost universally, the acts of violence are motivated selfishly. People want prestige, power, land, scarce resources. They compete for them on an individual, societal, national level. If they could follow truly the teachings of the Gita, which would be rid yourself of desire and then only engage in any action, then the violence of the world would dwindle away simply to acts of protection for the innocent there. So that's how Krishna is able to reconcile the idea of ahimsa with his instruction to Arjuna. Yes, Arjuna, fight, but do so without any hatred, without any malice, and without any selfish aspiration. Do it because it's for the welfare of the world. Loka sangraham. Oh, okay, another question I've seen is, would it be a correct statement to say that according to the Gita, all yogic practices, karma, jnana, etc., ultimately culminate in bhakti? I'm going to say no to that. I know, again, Robert Zahner, who writes, I think, as I said, from a Catholic perspective, he's anxious to impose that hierarchy of paths upon the Bhagavad Gita, but I do think it's an overinterpretation, and I think it's it doesn't do justice to the subtlety of the Bhagavad Gita. What I see is, reading it, is that the way of not karma yoga, I say yes, it does feed into both enlightened knowledge and also into bhakti. I mentioned those verses which show that. But bhakti and gyan, knowledge and devotion, go side by side, and they interact and relate to each other. So although they are accepted as two parallel viable paths, they're really two strands of the same process. But I don't think that one is necessarily given priority over the other. And this is demonstrated in chapter 18, verses 54 and 55, where Krishna says, first of all, that when you realize Brahman, then you achieve bhakti. But then in the next verse, he says, Bhakti mam abhijanati mam. And through bhakti, you gain knowledge of me. And I think, therefore, in those two verses, what we can see is, on the one hand, knowledge leads to bhakti, but bhakti also leads to knowledge. They are mutually reinforcing. And in chapter 8, verse 10, Krishna makes a really succinct statement again to demonstrate that point, the relationship between the two. He says, Bhaktya yukto yoga balena. He says, engaging in bhakti, Bhaktya yukto, yoga balena, through the power of yoga, and the yoga that is a way of gaining knowledge, as he has explained in chapter 6. So I would say that I don't accept that hierarchy. I think that's our imposition on it. Rather, he's offering two sources of spiritual inspiration to us that we can learn and benefit from. One is primarily related to knowledge, enlightenment, not dissociated from bhakti, and the other is devotion, worship, and grace, but not dissociated from knowledge. And they exist side by side. One might think incompatibly, but in the Gita's view, complementary way. Let's see. Would it be more appropriate to say that the Gita is a Moksha Shastra together with a manual to live our lives? Yes, definitely so. But then again, I don't see there's a difference between a moksha shastra and how we live our lives. I think one of the things that the Gita does that perhaps the Yoga Sutras doesn't do, or does much less, it takes yogic concepts and it applies them not just to the meditational times when we are specifically, this is my yoga time, 11 o'clock in the morning, I will do yoga for half an hour, sit in meditation, and I will practice the techniques of dharana, dhyan, etc. What the Gita does is it tries to make our whole lives a yoga life. So when it says withdrawal of the senses, pratyahara, that means for the Gita, not just when we're in meditation, turning our concentration inwards, it means living a life without desires, without constant hankerings for the objects of the senses. I've said a number of occasions, Gita is an absolutely revolutionary text. Probably if people understood the Gita, they would ban it because it's the very antithesis of our capitalist culture. It's the most fundamental, destructive text to our capitalist culture, far more so than Das Kapital or the Communist Manifesto, because it tries to show us the highest things in life, the real beauties, the most wonderful things in life. Sukhamadyantikam, a joy that has no limit, as it says, and it's all free. You already possess it. You don't need to go to the shops or anything. You don't need to look at any of the things that they're offering you. You don't need them at all. It's a joyful freedom. You can lie down, sit down and think, I don't want any of that stuff. It's not important. Therefore, that's what the Gita, and that's the way it's taking the yoga concept of pratyahara, withdrawing the senses, which is part of the technique of meditation, and it's applying it in a really fundamentally anti-materialistic ideology that it urges us to live by.